Afternoon. Welcome to today's Job Hunters Help Desk. We're on a Thursday instead of a Wednesday. So if you think you've lost a day of the week, you haven't. It's just Thursday today. And the reason we're here on a Thursday is because we have a guest. John Reed is with us, and he's going to tell you all about himself in a moment. But that led to us doing it on a Thursday. So I hope people are still here. If you are on, it always helps if you just drop a note into chat so we know you're there. Otherwise, we talk among ourselves and we say things that are really dubious if they get broadcast. So it would be better if you let us know you're there, and then we'll behave ourselves a little bit better. Today, we're going to look at hiring from an employer's perspective. And we just had a chat for 5-10 minutes, and it basically opens up just about every issue in recruitment when we start talking about it. But first of all, I'd just like, John, if you could just introduce yourself and explain why we're so lucky to have you as a guest on the show today.
Well, hopefully I can add some value, but thanks for inviting me, Greg and Simon. Yeah, happy to chat. Look, I'll keep it as brief as possible. So I got into recruitment first in 1998. I spent roughly 15-ish years as an agency recruiter, third party. I've worked multiple sectors, multiple styles of recruitment, from high volume temporary staffing through to very focused, what we used to call niche market perms for large employers, small employers. And then halfway through my career, I got an opportunity to move in-house, and I've spent the rest of my 27, 28, I'm getting old, years working in-house. So directly employed by employers, both large and small, covering defence, electronics, telecommunications, life sciences. I struggle to find a role type that I haven't at some point. I haven't had a huge amount of experience within large volume sort of public sector, but I have supported a few public sector. But most of my experience has been within the private sector. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an overview of me.
Brilliant. That which is absolutely perfect for today. And in fact, I mean, it's not a coincidence that it's perfect for today. It's because we're having today because we knew John was coming on. So it's absolutely the match is great. Greg, do you just want to talk a little bit about particularly your on-site experience, because you've got that too, haven't you? In your letter?
Yes, I mean, I've sort of covered recruitment from different sides of the fence, and I've also been a job seeker in a downturn about 25 years ago. I think 2001 in Cambridge was quite a tough time. So as a recruiter, I offer a number of services to clients, one of which is what you'd expect, which is filling vacancies. Another of which is process improvement. So I work across a variety of projects, from writing adverts for employers directly, branded for them, through to sort of mapping out candidate journeys on ATSs, which I have a lot of sympathy for job seekers, having gone through that mill myself. And from time to time, I manage recruitment on site for employers as well. Plus, earlier in my career, I've been a hiring manager. So I've been the person who hasn't got a clue what they're doing, trying to manage interviews and do interviews while having a job as well.
I think that's really important, that the fact that there's no such job title as hiring manager. All hiring managers do it off the side of their desk. They're going to be evaluated on their 360 annual review on everything but really recruiting into their team. And that's why I think it causes some problems. I have a very similar background. It's sort of a combination of John and Greg in a way. I often see the posts on LinkedIn where people say, I was in recruitment before email. Well, I was in recruitment before fax and before the word processor. So, and we had golf ball typewriters, and it was the poshest thing, IBM golf ball typewriters. When they arrived in Milton Keynes, it was a real changer for us. But so I've been in recruitment a long time, spent the first long time on the supply side, high street, then into decent permanent, and into retained. And then I also did some time in contracting leading up to year 2000, which was a strange experience. And then through fluke, I sort of jumped the fence in one of the organisations. We'd sold what amounted to a very wet behind the ears RPO deal to a business that had 12 people sitting in 2 rooms above the bakers in Twickenham. And they then came and said, well, do you fancy working for us? So I jumped the fence. It wasn't a part of the plan. I jumped the fence. And that was Axon, and they became the fastest growing professional services firm in Europe for 4 years. And I stayed with them through those 4 years and left when they had 1,200 people. And just a phenomenal 4 years, but it's really interesting seeing the change of behaviours from 2 rooms above the bakers to a great big building in Egham, just south of London. And then I went and did some stuff with Legal & General. I was head of recruitment at Legal & General, which was a massive culture shock from Axon, and something we can talk about a bit later. And I ended up selling and architecting recruitment process outsourcing deals for Capita. And then I think after that period of time, I decided that probably I needed to do something for myself. So I now work in a shed, which is lovely. 18 paces from my back door. The commute is horrible when it's raining, and I'm loving it. So I think between us, we have really quite an interesting.
Except we're all middle-aged white blokes, so we probably have
we are all middle-aged
no
white
different
blokes,
perspective.
and
Beards.
difficult. Now, and in fact, actually, yeah, we do need to address that. Actually, Greg, that's a fair point. Just a starting point for people who are listening, and to give people as much insight as we can, is just to help job hunters understand what might be going on behind the curtain, the other side of the fence, because employers of all different sizes can have different models through which they recruit. And it'd be interesting to see whether you guys think that, depending on the model, you need to change either your behavior or your application or expect a different interview process. I scribbled a few down, and I'm quite glad we had a chat before, because I realised I've forgotten one.
It's also worth pointing out that recruitment delights in obfuscating what we do. Like, we hide behind so much smoke and mirrors, whether it's posh titles or posh ways of working, when actually it's just a people business.
It may be worth defining as well the different models, because we've mentioned through our introductions on-site, in-house, agency, RPO. You've got managed service. Probably worth a quick.
Which makes a lot of sense to us, but if you're looking for a job, it's about as clear as mine.
And even on-site, my experience certainly, there are different types of on-site model. There's the process drivers, and that's closer to HR, and then there's proactive recruiters who get close to behaving as they would if they're in a supply side agency, but they're working inside the business. And then there's the RPO model, and then there's that sort of free-for-all where
my favorite is recruitment as a service, which it's just hilarious. SaaS
like
recruitment.
Software as a service. I might
yeah. So I came across it last year. It's just so weird.
In the businesses you have been in, the great thing about both of you is you've affected change when you've arrived, and that's one of the reasons they hired you. Is they want your expertise, they wanted you to work on process or collateral or brand or whatever it is. Just talk me through, and John, if we start with you. I know you had that big corporate experience with BAE, and then some very fast growth. What I suspect, short time, yeah, drives all mad. Sure. Then you moved into fast growth, sort of often early stage businesses and tech businesses. What has been, when you've gone into an organisation, what has been the thing that's really crying out that you should go in and use your recruiting expertise to change?
It's a very personal thing, and I'll start this by a quick sort of definition of the types of recruitment that I've experienced. And I'm not going to say any of these are good or bad per se, depending on where you sit. But I can broadly put recruitment into two styles. And this is as an employer, in-house recruitment, and that is what I would call high volume, low touch point recruitment, which is heavily process driven, or low volume, high touch point recruitment. You are more likely to experience very high volume hiring done by very large HR and TA teams within very large employers, because it's purely down to the sheer amount of vacancies. You're more likely to experience what I would describe as low volume, high touch recruitment within smaller employers. But it will purely depend on the culture of that business. Sometimes the age of that business, how long it's been around. I'm worried I'm going to go off on a tangent now. So
that never happens on this call, ever.
No.
Well, I think it's a really important point, though, because if you look at how recruitment's evolved over the last 20 years, it's been based on that corporate model, which is quite transactional, and it's impossible at that scale to provide individual service. So technology's lent into that, so to do more quicker and move more and more away from individual experiences, and also probably de-skilled the industry a lot as well. So when you look at independent recruiters, they tend to be more experienced.
Yeah, I've seen and experienced TA functions where every step of the candidate journey and the hiring journey, from attraction, from the initial creation of the role profile and the briefing, to then a different person creates the advert, a different person then manages the response to that advert, a different person then does the first stage screening, then it lands with a hiring manager, then a different person books the interview process. And then there are other types of sort of TA function where I've heard the phrase 360 full cycle, where you own everything from getting the role signed off, the budget agreed, through attraction assessment, introduction, onboarding, retention, 6 monthly check-ins, processing sickness, ended up actually doing a bit more of a HR role. So again, a bit of this will purely depend on the company. And as a job seeker, you're never going to know what that system is going to be until you...
Yeah, because we all say the same things, don't we?
Land there.
Like every single agency under the sun is disrupting the market with better candidate experience, and we're different. And every single employer has values of honesty, integrity, and candidates first.
I had an experience with a client recently who's going in as a senior HR person into a business. And because the head of recruitment is going to report to this client when he arrives, they've had a lot of conversations about the recruitment process. And the head of recruitment said, well, do you have any idea how many applications we got for this role? So no, you got 612 applications for the role. And I read every one. Now, if the head of recruitment read every role, that's phenomenal. The process was absolutely brilliant all the way through, very high touch. I thought that definition, John, is absolutely spot on. It keeps things so simple that, I'm an old bloke. I've been around for a long time. I've never heard it sound that simple before. But it is. The defining difference is the type of touch, the number of touches, the number of touch points, number of concerns. But what's happened in this process, I thought was brilliant, was it all went really, really well. Every question was responded to quickly. The candidate was given some authority in the process, so he could ask to speak to the finance director or whoever it was, and then he accepted the offer. And now he's in this grey area between offer acceptance and first day, and clearly no one in that business knows who owns that period. Whether it lives in recruitment, it lives with the hiring manager, and that is so dangerous. I've seen so much good work get thrown out the window because they don't care about candidates after that.
Yeah. How often have you spoken to someone on the first day and they're like, well, my computer's not been set up. I don't have an email address yet, so I'm just sitting around.
Yeah. This is why I say it boils down to the culture of the business. I mean, if you're genuinely employee-led, if you understand what user experience is and care about it, I think the most successful TA teams that I've been in and the most successful functions, there's a bit of a mantra, and that is you want everybody to have a positive experience regardless of outcome, or as near as you can get to a positive experience. I mean, you will never please all of the people.
I think constructive experience is probably better, because it's never nice to be told you're a no, but you can do it straightforwardly in a way that has a bit of grace.
Yeah,
experience is beyond the decision at the end. I absolutely agree, Greg. It's never nice to hear you've been rejected, whether that's in a job, it's in a pub, or whatever. You never want to hear that. So getting that is not nice. And I think there are ways to do it, and I don't think everyone's very good at that. I think we've been very good at communicating successful messages, but I still hear some really bad stories about how bad messaging, you're down to the last 3 or last 2, and either you're not communicated with at all because they have no courage, or the communication is really bad. And
even with the best intent, because as Jonathan was saying earlier, that he might have been ghosted by a potential employer, that reminded me I need to update a couple of candidates because I haven't.
Yeah, but equally, but I think experience is right the way through as well. And Robert's put up I think it's a very commonly held view that candidate first is not anywhere near the truth. And I don't think Robert, please correct me if I'm wrong, but Robert won't just be exclusively talking about that moment when he's rejected from the job. He'll be talking about the whole experience right the way through, where it is hard to get hold of recruiters nowadays because
they hide behind layers of technology. Absolutely. And it's frustrating, very frustrating.
Although ironically, I mean, I've got my telephone number on my profile, and I put it on all my adverts, unless it's redacted by CV Library or something like that. I get very few phone calls. The only phone calls I get are EE trying to sell me a new phone contract.
But this is what I mean about how seriously that company takes user experience or the candidate experience. And, you know, and I've got to say, sometimes talent attraction, internal recruitment is a bit of a compromise, or it's a bit of a negotiation. So you have what the business wants to hire, the objectives there, and that's usually sort of handed to the HR team that will build out a process, and they will put the systems in place. And as the systems and process are put into place, everybody has a little bit of an idea. Finance say, oh, you know, can we capture this data in the process as well? Or actually, can we make sure this data is pulled through to the HR system as well for some legal or compliance reason? And then what you end up with is a system that was built by a committee that pleases nobody, is horrible to use for the hiring community, the managers that are actually got to do this and the recruiters that have got to do it, and the candidate experience, and I'm just talking from a purely an application stage at this point, is horrific. Because nobody's thought about user experience. Nobody, it's just not come into it. And as with all things designed by a committee, it's pretty rubbish. And that translates, sadly, through the entire process. Unfortunately, you know, it's a compromise.
I think part of the problem, which alludes to what Mark said, is that there isn't a professional development scheme for talent acquisition unless you sit it within HR or another function. There's nothing dedicated to giving talent a seat at the table. So as a result, most companies kind of build it inside out to suit the organisation, or they sort of chop and drop from somewhere else.
The definition I've tried to give is whether the employer sees recruitment as an admin process or whether it sees recruitment as a business partnership.
Commercial opportunity.
You know, and this culture comes from the very top of the business. You know, I've worked with some HR directors that are extremely commercially astute, and they know recruitment is a partnering process. They know it's part of the brand of the business. It's the first touch point for many, many people with that organisation. And then you've got, you know, other HR directors, and I'm not going to name names, but I will quote, "Don't really care, John, just make it go away." You know, and that sort of screams, okay, that's the top of your people culture. One of the things Mark sort of touches on there, I mean, you know, companies work with 90% of recruitment process is sat with a hiring manager. You know, and this is what I mean about sort of user experience. The HR team has built out this function that's a compromise and massively, I would say, overcomplicated a lot of the time. They then put a system into place that's been designed by a committee that doesn't take the user, and I mean candidate and hiring manager, into account on what's easy to use. They don't want to engage with it. They don't want to use it. It doesn't capture any meaningful data. It's a pain in the backside to use. And none of that, I don't want to say none of these things are ever thought about. But,
well, a good example
you
of
feel
that
it as a
Workday, isn't it? Because everyone complains about Workday from both sides of the fence.
It's horrible piece of software.
But the reason it's such a big thing is because of its finance and HR modules. And that's why it's bought as part of the overall piece.
Yeah. So what you have is a TA team that might have a really, really great idea, but when it's just perceived to be a bit of an admin process for the business, they're not going to win, always going to win the argument with finance, HR, quality, and whoever else is having a say in that IT team that says, you know, you can or can't have
it tends to cut off the corners as well, doesn't it? Every time you go to someone else, oh, let's make it a bit blander because that's too risky. And that's where you end up with the job adverts we all joke about.
Well, yeah, the ransom notes.
Just quickly to go back to Mark's comment, and I don't know Mark, so I don't know through which lens he's looking at this, but it's really interesting. For me, when I have gone into an employer, before I've accepted any role, permanent or contract, I've had to understand what my authority was, because I would not have hiring managers owning 90% of the recruitment process, because it's going to be my neck on the block when hiring managers fail, and hiring managers have better things to do than my job. You know, they've got their own job to do. I didn't go and try to run a research and development department or whatever. I focus on what I'm good at, and that was always a really big issue for me when I was. You either let me run the function or you get someone else, because I'm not going to suffer. I think that, but Mark is absolutely right. The companies where 90% of recruitment process has sat with the hiring managers, it can make the experience, I think, inconsistent. So it undermines brand completely. You know, employer brand and commercial brand. I think it also means that it massively changes the nature of who they're hiring. There needs to be a base level of governance.
And that's the challenge, isn't it, for candidates? Because you just don't know what's behind the veil. It could be, as Mark describes, or as you describe, or somewhere in between. And all you've got is a bland website.
Yeah, I mean, look, very, very often when I look at the size of employers and the fact that actually most don't have a dedicated internal recruitment function, you know, they'll have a HR team, and more often than not, that first experience that you get from the job posting, from the advert creation to the person who receives your application, first of all, will typically be the lowest paid and lowest skilled member of a HR team, which could be a HR administrator. So now they may be extremely competent at their job and very, very good. And I don't want to denigrate anybody that does that role at all, but they genuinely have the breadth of knowledge and experience to be able to, you know, challenge the hiring teams on what they need, you know, get accurate feedback, even define the role and the measurables against it. I would argue not. And this is what I mean when you say you don't know if the employer views recruitment as an admin process or as a business partnering function. So you as a job seeker, you have to second guess constantly.
And that's where you and I sort of spoke about customizing CVs on your post the other week, which I think we both hold the same opinion that there's a lot of narrative that you should customize the CV, but actually in most situations, you first of all just need to see if you're a qualified candidate, and then if you are, your CV should speak for itself, because you don't know what's going on behind the scenes and what they're looking for.
I love this question from Robert. Again, Robert, I don't know the lens he's looking at the market from, but why are we persisting with job specs and standard interviews rather than really understanding the hiring manager's pain points?
Drives me mad.
And that's fine. But it's a really good question, and I think, you know, CVs, job specs, interview processes come up in conversations regularly, but they've always survived. Is now the technology, because if we're not going to do, there's an argument that a good job specification and a good interview process should understand that and be driven by the hiring manager's pain points. So I don't want to rule out traditional methods, but is there anything better that would satisfy Robert?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this again boils down to that same thing. It depends on the competency levels in the teams, or how they're structured. But how it happens in a lot of places is job spec was created for X role at some point in the distant past. Hiring manager puts a request in to hire a leaver, or it automatically sort of kicks through the system. The spec gets raised, you know, a process is followed, and then that spec is just posted out and advertised, and then people are sort of pumped through the process. There is often a one-size-fits-all recruiting process that you experience in businesses, and we see that a lot as TA people, and you're not always in a position to be able to challenge it, because the prevailing thinking is, well, it's worked for us in the past, it will continue to work for us. Again, no real thought to user experience or added value. That I would say that there are a lot of very talented recruiters out there that don't operate that way. But it's a bit of a battle for some TA teams. I've typically found that most are under-resourced. They're running too high a rec load, and being able to have that, you know, really in-depth briefing and digging into really what is it that we want to hire, how are we going to find this person, you know, and that real clarity of mission and purpose. You know, they don't always get the time to do it. Quite simply, you know, there's an optimal number, I would say, of recs that a TA person will run, and you know, hopefully, fellow TA people that do listen to this don't shoot me for this, but I'd say it's probably about 15. Anything more than that, I would say you tend to have a bit of an aneurysm, and something's going to give, and that thing that gives is usually candidate experience.
It's either candidate experience or recruiter well-being. They're the two things that
recruiter well-being. What's that?
Yeah, I know. They'll just keep flogging them, hit them hard enough, and they'll keep on working.
Yeah. I was a phone interview at 9 o'clock at night.
I was really surprised when I'd come out of a very fast growth, very aggressive, very successful professional services firm that had a really high bar for recruitment, and the founder gave the recruitment team and me as recruitment director huge amounts of authority. We could walk around the building, and if we wanted to, a program director or a fairly senior person in business was at their desk, and they couldn't prove to me that what they were doing was directly related to revenue generation, I could take them away at that moment for an interview. I mean, I had one guy, and he lives 3-4 miles from me now, and he won't be watching, so of course, who actually hid in a cupboard to avoid coming on an interview because he wasn't doing revenue generating work. I think we would not allow HR people to become accountants overnight without training and development. And yet we often allow anyone to become a recruiter, because recruitment is one of those things that everyone can do. It's like marketing. Everyone can do it. It's just some people do it better than others. And the people who do it better tend to be the recruiters. And so going back to Robert's point, when recruitment as a process is taken away from the people who specialize in that process, I'd like to think it's bound to suffer.
Yeah, or the process has been designed by a committee. It suffers. And again, and I know I bang on about this point, but it boils down to how genuinely people, seriously, a senior leadership team of any business, take attraction, assessment, introduction, and retention.
So Mark's come with a couple of points here. So Mark's a hiring manager. So this is very interesting. As a hiring manager, I'm invested in getting the best candidate, but so surprised that I'm still creating the job adverts, creating the questions and tests, etc., having to do the shortlist. I would question the role of the recruitment function in Mark's business, because they should be wanting to take that away from him and delivering a service to Mark, so Mark can get on and do what he's paid for, would be my opinion.
Or not even a service, more of that business partnership role. Okay, so Mark, you're great at whatever it is you do. You focus on that. You and I should spend some time together. Let's define what we want to find and how we're going to find it. And apart from a few check-ins, the next thing you should hear from me is some CVs landing on your desk, or via a system that we can collaborate through, where we'll have a conversation. Usually, first shortlist may not always be bang on, and we can further refine from that point, and then find the person for you. But again, this boils down to how your employer structures your recruiting function.
You end up having a very broad range of agreements with different agencies, and it can be really unfair on some of your best suppliers if, say, they've agreed a lower rate based on volume, and then you're going a lot higher elsewhere for higgledy-piggledy CV sending.
Yeah, I have some views on agency usage. Personally, I don't see the point in hiring an internal recruiter and then expecting them to outsource everything. Especially the high volume sort of PSL type models, because ultimately what you create then, and I've got trapped into this myself in a TA role that I subsequently walked away from, and that was the volume of roles was so high that it was impossible to deliver all of them directly yourself as a business. There was just too many, so you end up having to outsource them. And because of the way the agencies are structured these days, where you've got vertical market specialists with very narrow focuses, and I might be recruiting across a breadth of roles in G&A functions, from facilities through to tech support, through to toll manufacturing, the list is endless. I end up having to deal with a different recruiter for each vertical specialist, which means my role then degenerates into managing external relationships and managing that process and being charged 15 to 20% for the privilege of doing it. And again, this boils down to whether the TA team is sufficiently resourced enough to be able to manage. I've always thought, if you're going to use a third party agency, don't compete with them. My mantra was always, if I had an agency working on a role, it would be, it's because I'm not working on it. I'm working on these roles. You own that. You can fill that. I'll give you exclusivity. I'll pay you a decent fee because it needs to be delivered. But what a lot of employers will do is think more is better, and they'll fling the role out through some god-awful
because they don't think about user experience.
Yeah, again, this is what I mean. It all comes from the top. So they'll fling it out via some god-awful vendor portal and at some rubbishy fee. So the recruitment agencies put their least experienced recruiters on it because it's the worst fee, lowest touch point, held at arm's length recruiting relationship with your supplier. And if you're a candidate in that process, good luck to you.
My sister-in-law's not a recruiter, but she's not really. She's maybe sister-in-law at some point, but she works for a very notable recruitment guy who's been on quite a few TV shows, and for one of his niche businesses, because she had a skill set that could support what they were doing. And she said that the recruiters would be working on all the cool brands, and then they'd be given exclusive vacancies that I would lap up as a independent recruiter, as most normal people would, and they just put them at the bottom of the pile because they weren't sexy, because they just wanted the cool businesses to work for.
Yeah. When I arrived at a really large financial services firm, they had 30, 40 people in their talent acquisition team, and they were really fantastic people, worked really hard, massively ambitious, desperately underpaid, but they were underpaid because the company wanted them to be seen as HR assistants. That's where they would compare across the line, and it took us time to convert that into a proactive recruitment function where they were actually delivering more value than they cost, and we were able to increase their salaries, and they probably had the skills. So let's say recruitment isn't that difficult. We're not rocket scientists, are we? We can learn it relatively quickly, and we get better with time.
It's very easy to do badly.
It is very easy to do it badly. Just this point about phone numbers. I always put mine on my adverts. It definitely is worth thinking of a well-paid candidate to ring and find out more. Several of my current team members reached out before applying to their benefit. It's
something I recommend every employer do. And then whenever I speak to a TA person, they say, "Oh no, I can't do that. We'll be inundated with calls."
Right. Yeah, I see it at the time. Can I just knock that one on the head? So I've recently been working for a startup in Cambridge in an exciting market that was hiring a lot, in a really, these were very, very good jobs. And I put my mobile number on all adverts. I got maybe 2 sales calls a week.
Yeah.
It's just not. I'm sorry, it's just not a thing unless you work for Google and everybody's trying.
Well, even then, it takes agency to make a phone call. It doesn't take agency to click on easy apply. So the TA people who say they don't want to put telephone numbers on there because they're already getting a high volume of applications. Well, A, if you look at their adverts, they're probably quite generic anyway, so it's appealing to everyone. And B, they're probably a lot of those applications are people who are either pressing easy apply on LinkedIn or using automation.
This kind of touches also on the sort of CV thing as well. And I just wanted to sort of say something on that, because there's something I've said to hiring managers and employers many, many times. And it's the manner in which people choose to apply for a role can sometimes say way more than the content of their application. So if you want somebody with good communication skills, somebody who's not afraid of asking, sometimes difficult questions, seeking that agreement, they've got good levels of business acumen, they've got good relationship management skills, all of this comes through, but they might have spent 10 or 15 years at the same business, don't really know how to make applications. Their CVs, it's fine, it's absolutely fine, but picking up that phone and having that conversation, I've got off the phone to people before that I've just gone straight into the hiring manager that we need to get this person into an interview. But the sad thing I see is, and as recruitment degenerates more and more into hiding behind more and more layers of technology, under the auspice of being scalable, that it becomes more and more an admin process. I see more companies cut themselves off from this and actually being in a position where you can speak to a human being and ask intelligent questions prior to putting a formal application in. That door's shut to you. It's absolutely shut to you, and I find it relentlessly frustrating.
Well, there's 2 points I'd make to that as well, is that most adverts say, please apply now with your up-to-date CV and cover letter. But if your candidate who's been in a company for 15 years doesn't have a CV, then that becomes a barrier. If they're a great candidate and they don't want to update their CV, whereas having a phone number makes it easier to start that conversation and see if it's even worth doing.
They might not want to apply yet. When we look at application, sort of view to application ratios, and I've looked at a lot of this data, and it was one of the things I used to track at my previous employer, and I saw it as a success if my view to application ratio went up. And I think I'm quoting Mitch Sullivan when he said, there's no use people looking in the shop window if they're not going to come in the shop and buy something. So I've also found that having that data out there, that information out there, your contact details out there, it means, people that want a better job than the job they've got now, they're way more likely to pick up the phone and say, you know what, I'm happy where I am at the moment, but I've got some questions because this project looks exciting or that looks exciting, and they'll have a conversation with you. If you treat your recruitment process like an admin function and you've got some junior people that run it for you, that never happens.
I think also there's a real problem in the market at the moment, and that is that people, I think, have given up trying to contact recruiters. There's a proportion of people who've given up trying to make that call. The number may be there, but they have found it so difficult in the past to get through to a human being when they've. I challenge anyone to go and look at any 10 recruitment companies at the moment and find more than 6 or 7 that have a direct phone number that you can contact them on. They don't even put their phone numbers on their websites anymore, and that is incredible. And I think that's led to this sort of malaise in the market where, you've got a number there, but no one's going to answer it. It's going to go to a voicemail and it's not going to get, to the extent that one of my most successful coaching sessions was just telling people how to leave a voice message. I get a call back,
I never realised that there could be a quality to a voicemail until someone said to me about 8 years ago, "Oh, you left me a voicemail. I don't normally call people back from voicemails, but there's something about your message." And I literally said, "Hi, it's Greg from Birch & White Recruitment. I came across your CV on CV Library, wondered if you'd like to have a chat about a career opportunity." And he called me back. Is that a good voicemail? I don't know.
I think what makes it, in my opinion, what makes a voicemail is you being able to write down the return number in one go.
Yeah.
So have gaps between groups of numbers. So because to be honest, I've been in a meeting or an interview for an hour and I come back and I've got 37 voicemails. And I don't get the phone number down the first time. Well, I'm not going to read up. We go back and listen again. I'll go on the next one. So just breaking up your phone number into writable chunks makes a massive difference. You don't need to go into chapter and verse, but let them know what you're ringing about and why they should ring you back. I think that's important.
I think the other thing is about when you're public with your number, it basically means you're willing to nail your colours to the mast. So if you've interviewed with me and you haven't got your feedback, I can't hide from you.
I think it also helps with accessibility, doesn't it? I mean, everyone talks about being fair and diverse, but actually, if you make it easy to get in touch, that's a really good way to show who you are.
I mean, how many companies put "our people are our most important asset" on their website, and then you don't see the head of recruitment, the person who brings the most important asset into that business, on their board? I have worked in 2 companies where I've sat on the board, and they're the only 2 companies that I've been where a TA or an internal recruiter or recruitment director has sat on the board. And every company I've worked for said it's most important piece. So
I think we all probably know that there are broadly speaking, 2 types of companies. There's where marketing created the values because it looked good, and then there are genuinely values-led organisations. I'm not going to point fingers or anything like that. I think we all know when we work for a company who's genuinely a values-led business or tries to live those values as much as possible, and you can give evidence, so if a company says as one of our values, we care for our people. Okay, great. Show me. I want to see evidence of when you've done that and how you've supported people when you haven't had to. And that's really the thing. It boils down to the integrity, really, of the company. And I think we all define integrity pretty similarly, and that's just doing the right thing when no one's looking.
Also, I mean, there are things that we do at Axon we wouldn't be allowed. I don't think we'd allowed to do now. For example, there's one guy, and he's now a partner in a Big Four, but he came to a project manager to Axon. He'd flown in from South Africa. He was there for 2 days. We had to complete while he was there if we were going to get him. He had 2 kids. His wife had a hair or whatever, and was going to go and couldn't look after the kids. So we set up a mini creche in one of our interview rooms for the kids, and we completed the interview process we offered. He accepted before he left the building. And he joined us, had a great career with Axon, has now moved on since then. I think understanding what is important to a candidate will only come if you talk to them. And my concern around and Robert's comment about putting a number on the advert makes it really easy for candidates to call and commit or discount. It makes it really easy for candidates to call. Putting your number on the advert does not make it easy for you to answer the phone. From what I can see from the market, is that phone calls, are they? That's the problem.
Yeah. Send a text, use a WhatsApp, drop an email. The email's on there, doesn't it? It's 2025. There are a million ways of different ways.
Ogilvy did some research. I think it was Ogilvy, the advertising chap, that if you double the means of contact in an advert, you'll double the amount of inquiries because people have different communications preferences. So for me, telephone number, email address, apply now, those are all different ways in which someone can get in touch. And I'm not so bothered about people applying now. I'm bothered about starting conversations with relevant people. And I think what a lot of adverts miss the point of is that readers can have a look at an advert and decide never to get in touch because of whatever it is that's annoyed them. I was going to say pissed off, but obviously we can't swear on these things.
I worked for a client who, when he hired salespeople, would put an email address and a phone number on the advert, and anyone who used the email address he rejected straight away.
But that, I mean, you're looking for that though. You're hiring salespeople. I mean, I spent a long time hiring salespeople, and that's exactly with them. It's how they apply. Sometimes there's more than the application, because if they, ring you up, look for your needs, formulate the solution, i.e., I'm the solution to this, then close you at the end of that call. Yeah, get that person in.
And that's the sad thing in the current marketplace, is that a lot of job search gurus forget to say use your skills in your job search. And if you're a salesperson who's out of work, you should be picking the phone up.
You should also be able to map your market and do all the other things.
Look, there'll be hiring managers out there right now that are struggling to hire because they're not being supported correctly. So I would say to anybody that's out there job hunting at the moment, and I'm job hunting as well right now, and I do exactly the same thing, is it's not necessarily bypassing the recruitment team, but if you see a business you're interested in, it's never been easier than now to find those people online and just say, look, this is me, this is what I do, you're working on this area that's really of interest to me, and this is why. Here are my details, because I promise you there are hiring managers out there that you can be the catalyst for them to go, why haven't we got this person? Why haven't I seen this person?
And I think it absolutely works. I mean, one of the big parts of a TA leader's job, certainly when I'm older than both of you guys, but when I was to make sure candidates didn't do that. We wanted to feed them through the recruitment function. We wanted to make sure that we were getting credit for the reduction in cost per hire. We wanted to make sure that we were feeding them a consistent message. And we actually, in one particular company, we actually penalised hiring managers if they spoke to recruiters without telling us.
Yeah, I mean, it's
a bit damned if you do, damned if you don't, unfortunately,
absolutely.
The whole of recruitment.
That's a real problem, I think.
Look, losing control of the process when you're an in-house recruiter because one of the hiring managers rang his mate at an agency or who's promised they've got great candidates. I mean, look, the reality of it is if it's got to that point, I would argue that your TA function is probably not particularly credible with your hiring community. If they're doing that, and this is what I mean. It's either a business partnership, where you support them as a trusted partner in not just finding people, but also coaching them through the process, teaching them how to what I call hire with confidence. So you're getting it right first time. I'm sorry to say that's probably not going to happen if the person you've got doing your recruitment was, I don't know, selling gym memberships 6 months ago. With respect,
but Mark seems to be going out for it. I'm very grateful for it. Mark is going out of his way to think of everything he can raise that's going to be controversial, and is going to get steam coming out with the increase in AI. And I'm saying that without spitting, both for companies or candidates. How do you get to the candidates you want? That is an open question.
I think it's pretty simple. It's with care, and that's what's missing from a lot of particularly automated messaging. How we write adverts as skilled advert writers starts at the top of the process with conversations. So I think it was Mark mentioned earlier, finding out the pain points of a vacancy and really doing that. Sorry, you might have talked about this earlier because the dog was going mental, so I haven't got a clue.
Your dog just got crossed. I'm surprised you didn't bark at the AI question, to be honest.
But having a standout advert speaks to people personally, and you've got to do the work to do that. Unlike AI, which is pass the information and put it into some sort of semi-digestible format. At some point, AI will get to that stage where it can do it much more effectively. That's not at the moment. Something I talk about regularly is reciprocating the level of care that you experience, or if you want something to happen, give them the quality of care that you experience back. So when you write an advert, you speak to people directly. you take the time to figure out what good is. You take the time to figure out why would they even want to entertain picking up the phone or getting in touch to make an inquiry, let alone apply. And that's how you stand out compared to AI. And it's something I get regularly as feedback from candidates. Oh, it felt much more human. Well, obviously it's written by a human, but it's only because I take care in crafting a message that's relevant for someone I want to speak to. And I think it's the same for CVs as well. Don't worry about doing more but quicker. Worry about messages that count. Firstly, check, are you qualified for a vacancy and why? And if you're not sure, picking up the phone. And secondly, make sure that your CV explains why, rather than trying to auto customize through lazy apply or whatever the service is.
And
I mean, to be fair, just really quickly on the AI tools, I've worked with tons of different ATS systems, and I appreciate I might be living in a bit of a bubble. But I've worked for large businesses, small businesses across multiple sectors. I still haven't seen any tools that can do anything other than filter out an obvious no, and that obvious no will be based on filters that you've already popped into the system. So hopefully, I'm this might be a case of my lack of.
No, I think you're right.
Tools to be fair, but those filters are typically things like, do they have eligibility? If you're a non-sponsor, if you can't sponsor, for example, you might cut people out of that, or the role might require a very specific characteristic, that is legal to do this, and you might automatically discount people that don't fit that.
I think there's a central hypocrisy sitting at the front of all this, that quite rightly candidates are demanding maybe a return to humanity in recruitment, more human contact, more people getting involved, etc., and then they send you an AI generated CV.
It's the chase of more and quicker, isn't it?
Ways, and I think that AI, I know I can recognise CVs now from maybe 3 or 4 CV writers. As soon as it hits on my desk, I know, because you've got.
Look.
Oh yeah, me too.
But also AIs as well. I'm beginning to understand now how AI forms CVs. I go, that's
to answer John's concern about are you in a bubble? So through the power of LinkedIn Science, I did a poll recently, and it was quite a low volume poll. I think we had about 99 legitimate responses, but I contacted them all, and the question was, are you using AI to automatically reject applications without human intervention? And I said this is for employers and recruiters only. So we had about 16 people who just voted because that's what they wanted to do and they've never hired in their life. But of the 99 responses, 5 said yes. 2 of those replied with how they use it, and actually how they're using it is to filter shortlists to try and identify wholly unqualified candidates rather than to make decisions. So actually, although they voted yes, they were no's. And of the no's, about half of them replied to me, and they represented about 2,000 vacancies, mainly in the UK, but internationally per year. So that's not a bad volume overall. And not only did they not use AI, but they're all quite pissed off about the narrative that AI is rejecting people. But the reason they don't talk about it is because, like you, they worry they're in a bubble.
This is the thing. So I'm happy to nail my colours to the mast here, and as a buyer of recruiting technology, I've had the only things that people try to sell me have been, the AI-based video interviewing tools. And when I've politely asked, well, why would I ever consider doing this? Because it's AI, as in that's a reason in itself. And I'm like, but what value is this actually adding? You're just adding another hurdle in a process that actually successful.
I think we are going to have a massive problem
pace.
In a couple of years' time with agentic AI, when people start rolling out their agents to do all the automated comms and just saturate the market with bullshit. And then that's going to be hard to stand out just because of the volume. But we'll come to it when we come to it.
I think that in my head, there are kind of candidates who have made an effort and candidates who haven't.
Yeah.
And bring up easy apply earlier, which I think is the death of recruitment. If you have spent 30 seconds, 45 seconds reading a job description and you push easy apply, where is the basis for you requiring as a candidate 15 minutes personalised feedback on your CV? I don't understand that. And if people actually started applying just for roles that they were qualified for,
wouldn't that be wonderful? Because unqualified candidates take oxygen away from qualified candidates. And if you've got 300 applications come through, the temptation to shut the advert, whereas people who are taking their time might lose out because of that. So it's a disaster all round.
It's not going to happen. And it's never going to happen. There's a reason. It's just a simple psychology of what happens to people when they're job hunting. And I've been in this situation myself. Okay? So you're made redundant for whatever reason, or you're not working for whatever reason. That's it. And you need a job. You got bills to pay, family to support, whatever. So your role becomes finding a job. That is now your job, and you need to feel you achieve something every day on that.
Action makes progress is the mantra, isn't it?
And sometimes, and I can really empathise for why people do it. The reality of it is, it's our role as recruiters, providing we take a good brief, and we get under the skin of what's needed, and we write a compelling advert that explains to people, this is what we need, this is what success looks like, this is how we're going to measure it. These are the hard skills and the behaviors that we're going to be looking for. And if you can demonstrate that, we will have a conversation with you. That's what it is. That's our role to do it. But we are always going to get those people that will apply to jobs. They go, yeah, I can do that. Click apply. I can do that. Click apply.
Of course, the other side of the problem is generic adverts where essential
you read the
criteria
advert,
aren't actually
do
listed.
that job.
Oh, yeah, you've been rejected because of this criteria, which wasn't on the advert. So how are people supposed to know?
You'll never know the criteria, because again, this boils down to how the recruitment process is structured in that business. So who took the brief? Was it a job advert? Was it a job description that was written 5 years ago that's been approved through an ancient process in a massive business? The hiring manager's probably not even seen it. It's been posted. It bears no resemblance. The hiring manager sat there and going, why the hell am I getting all these rubbishy applications? Because sometimes, businesses will trump, I will just say common sense. And nobody at any point says, actually,
I know.
In fact, it can be career limiting in TA, and it has been for me. If you highlight, this ain't working, guys.
Yeah. I have quite a simple view, and that is that transparency wins from both sides of the fence. And we've got people who do my job who are coaching candidates with these really smart ALEC answers about how to answer an interview question. And on the same side, there are recruiters and there are hiring managers and there are HR people who seem to think that recruitment is a tricky process. Let's see if we can catch them out with a clever question about hairs on a dog, or tennis balls in a jumbo jet. Let's try and catch them out. If we just are honest, say this is what we need, and this is how we're going to evaluate it, and we're looking for the best possible candidate. Give the candidates the information they need, and let them answer. Don't leave them in the dark, and don't think you can walk into an interview as if the guy on the other side of the desk has never been interviewed in his life, and he doesn't know what you're doing. He does. Let's just quickly. So Nick, we've got to go to Nick's comment in a moment, because Nick said something really nice about me and Greg earlier in the week on LinkedIn. So
Nick's the best.
I think this is a really important point from Robert, and we may be going back to a discussion we had last week about unconscious bias. But are you able to talk about unadvertised market and advice to senior candidates?
That's a really good one. I mean, it's for the basis of my book, which is coming out soon, and I talk about it a little differently to the hidden jobs market. I think there's three things you have to accept about the market, and firstly, you have to establish that there isn't, as we talked about before, an overall jobs market. There's a jobs market that's specific to you, and the rules of that market are unique to you based on your context and your salary level and your geography and all these other wonderful things. Which is why talking about the unadvertised jobs market is a little bit misleading, but I think a healthy way to look at it is that any job search is the inverse of how that vacancy is recruited for. So at a senior level, those are typically more likely to be headhunted, or through executive search, or however you want to sort it, the mysterious terms that we sometimes hide behind. And so how do people do executive search? And it's a combination of things. Some old school people do have their little black book still. And I know one recruiter who said, I don't do any of this bullshit, because when they ask me about this job, I know it's John, so I'm going to call John about it. Whether or not that's a fair and diverse way of doing it, who knows? But I think the key thing there is it replicable for the normal human being? And that's probably not. So it's not worth worrying about. But what you can replicate is the various methods through which people find candidates. The key one is sourcing. So that's the set of principles through which we find people on LinkedIn, on CV databases, on the various resources that we got access to. The second side of it is, networking and referrals. How can you build networks with people that can refer you into those roles, who might be peers, but might also be headhunters? So, we talked about the sales process of mapping out the market, understanding the rules of your market and who the players are, and getting in touch with them and building a case for yourself. That's how you access unadvertised jobs.
Can we just quickly, and I think it's really important, that last bit about advice for senior candidates. What is our? I mean, we talked at great length last week about unconscious bias, and clearly age discrimination is a massive issue in the country at the moment. Is there any straightforward points that we can give to Robert that help in that space? Because I found last week, Robert, by the way, if you are listening still, we haven't bored you to tears, I think the recorded version is still on the events page, so go and have a look. So it was really interesting discussion last week about how people can handle unconscious bias and how they can't.
Well, I think you're talking about senior being tethered to age, which isn't necessarily. I mean, executive level roles could be a lot younger people as well. There's two separate but related matters there. I think for anyone, it's a question of mapping out what's going on in your specific market, and that's where you take action.
Yeah, and you've got to realise that the higher you move through your career pathway, the more focused your skills can sometimes become.
And the scarcity of opportunity.
Either way, it is a bit of a triangle, and the amounts of opportunities get less and less, and also that perception people will have of you, which I think we've probably all experienced. Anybody that's sort of been doing it actually for any period of time, really, people think you're at a certain level or think your salary is a certain amount. And again, that boils down to putting yourself in a position where you can actually have that conversation with people.
Greg, you're right. Robert was talking about senior as C-level, not as a question. Yeah. So thanks for putting up.
I mean, obviously, they tend to be tethered because the more senior you are in your career, typically that goes with age. But it doesn't necessarily hide discrimination. I think it's more about the process of finding those roles that he's interested in.
Yeah, even in my own career, look, I've always recommended people, leverage your network as much as is humanly possible. Who do you know? Where have they gone? Keep those doors open. Try not to burn bridges.
Because everyone says, "Oh, you must network," but how do you actually network? Everyone's like, "Oh, give us a job," and you're lucky if that person's got a job. But building relationships is different.
I think this is the crux of recruitment, though, if I'm honest. Nobody seems to care about it until they either need a job or they need to hire. Then all of a sudden they put the effort in. And it's sometimes, it needs to be an ongoing thing. And we talk about pipelining talent. You've got to sometimes think to pipeline your career as well. What's the next thing for me? If this doesn't go anywhere, do I want to start thinking about things that are out there?
I think that's a really, really important point, because I think a lot of certainly my clients start all of the things they should be doing all the time the day after they're made redundant. Which is
how doesn't networking benefit your career? Clients, learning, peers. Yeah, it's easy to say you should be doing it early on, but it's such an important thing.
I'll just quickly add this thing as well. And I'm sorry if it's very slightly off on a tangent, but employers need to think about this as well. Because, and this is what I mean about that candidate process around that experience. And that is, if people have as near to a positive experience as possible, they're going to remember you. They might not be right for your business now, but will they ever consider reapplying to your business again? I tell you, if you treat them like crap, they will not reapply to your business again. They might get 10 years further into their career, get exactly the experience that you want to need, but they still remember how you made them feel 5, 6, 7 years ago.
We had a code on our database which was DNTU for did not turn up, but essentially the person was an asshole.
Yeah,
so
I have.
If we ever did a data protection request, we could say DNTU, I did not turn up.
I still have a little black book of, wouldn't go near them, and that's employers as well.
Which is unfortunate because people can just have bad times, can't they? And they can change. But
I think an overarching strategy for networking, because I think, take your point, how do you network? Networking can't just be a one-way street. You can't, whether you're doing it all the time or at the time that you need a job, it can't be, if I identify this guy in a business, he could help me get a job, or she could help me get a job. What are they going to get out of that? What you have to go to your networking with something.
With them. That's what it is. What's in it for me? It's a copywriting principle.
And if you don't
help that person,
Comment, John.
Can I, sorry, really quickly, just touch on what Robert Ray's mentioned there in the questions, how knowledgeable recruiters are in the roles that are being advertised.
We'll come back to
it. Yeah, that's a real.
It's a careful balance, isn't it? Because you don't want to be lost in the weeds.
Look, it depends, and this is what I've said before. It depends on the size of the function, and how seriously that company takes recruitment. Look, some recruiters are highly versed in the types of people and the skill sets that they're hiring for. Other recruiters, no, they're not. But it depends on how the process is managed in the business. Is the recruiter a decision maker in the process, or are they a process administrator? Some recruiters.
Does it really matter? Because if they've got a throughput of vacancies, does it matter how technical they are? I know Robert's mentioned the black folder for recruiters and companies, and it's a really important point, because I think what you have to realise is that sometimes recruiters can be crap at what they do, but they might also represent a brilliant vacancy. So sometimes that's cutting your nose off to spite your face.
This is again, Bob, certainly with some of the larger employers. Look, you look at the way recruitment agreements are put into place, and sometimes very large employers that hire a lot of people, some really great jobs. They will sign agreements with very large recruitment agencies, and unfortunately, if you want to work for that company, you have no choice but to go through that process. And that large agency might mostly hire people that have less than 2 or 3 years experience.
And that can be the case at executive search level as well. I mean, I know quite a few executive search recruiters. I'm not primarily executive search, but I know a lot of people who are, and they come out of the big firms who've got that professional service model of the big guys at the top, and then the weakest link of the chain, as we kind of talked about, who actually do the research and talk to people. So you can sometimes think, oh, this executive search firm is absolutely terrible because of the experience you've got, but they could still be the route to your job.
I think one of the real problems for recruiters, it's a little bit like, and maybe this is a dangerous analogy, but a nurse has to give their first injection. They always have to do, everything has to be done for the first time. And recruiter, I think the flash to bang time that most recruitment companies expect from their new hires, people who come in, and a friend of my son's started and finished a career in recruitment very quickly with a really well-known, almost a household name, employs thousands of recruiters, and at he says it's 3:21 because he looks at his watch. At 3:21 on his first day, he was told to start making sales calls into clients. Yeah. So he'd been there since 8 o'clock in the morning. And I once sat down with it was contract recruitment, and I was taken to my desk, and there was a big copy of the Yellow Pages. That's how old I am. Yellow Pages, and in front of me. On the right-hand side, there's a bit of A4 paper stuck to the desk, and they had technical job titles, and on the left-hand side there were technical things like COBOL and KICS and DB2 our dashboard with descriptions of what they were, and said, "Off you go, mate. Attack the Yellow Pages."
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, it's not really changed as far as I'm aware.
That's so
we just call it Apollo and other tools now, don't we?
Yeah, just really quick on Nick's point there, the recruiter actually does. they don't need to be a subject matter expert. No. It helps when it comes to taking a good brief, and I will always say everything starts from the brief. If they know their market fairly well, they will know whether we're looking for the purple unicorn or whether the hiring manager's mad, and can push back on it. But ultimately, their role is to push people through a basically what is an attraction assessment introduction funnel.
I think product management's a good equivalence for recruitment. So we're the process experts, whereas the hiring managers tend to be the subject matter experts. So as long as we got that relationship right, it works quite well.
I think it's also really key that, and it's key in all jobs, but don't talk with authority about things you know nothing about, because you'll get caught out, because you will end up talking.
Well, that's not how politicians do it, though, is it?
No, I think that's not how. So I was once taken to one side, and I had a half-day training session with a very large recruitment company, and it was basically entitled "How to Talk with Authority About Things You Know Nothing About." Drop in those. My wife's a genius at it. She'll listen to a little bit of a chat about football, and then she'll
dangerous. This is very dangerous.
She's not listening. But she'll say something like, "Florian Wirtz is expensive, isn't he?" And that's all she knows. She doesn't know where he's coming from or anything else. But she's picked up that piece of information, and I tend to align that sometimes with early stage recruiters who are so terrified of going to the market and not being seen as an SME that they pretend, and then they're talking to someone who actually.
That's kind of what leads to those sort of cliched behaviours, isn't it? Obviously, it's the best job on the market. It pays brilliantly. You're going to love it there. You're a great candidate for it. It's just like a load of hot air, really.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and ask questions like, well, when were you last on site with that client? Because they're giving you the information you'd only know if you'd spent time on the site. But
I mean, the reality is for your average job seeker, they're not. I don't want to say rule out these people at all, because very junior recruiters can access to the perfect job for you. So I want to say there isn't a solution to this, problem.
Yeah.
You kind of have to put up with it to a point. They will get there. Yeah. Eventually. I'm trying to be nice.
Well, the
sorry.
Thing I say is
into what? Internet. Is that a new thing?
So what I would say is it is really difficult, and we end up on calls like this and on the coaching call, etc., talking to people who haven't yet been successful. But just remember, every time you get a rejection, the likelihood is that someone has been successful. So recruitment is working for some people. It's not working for the people on this call. And it's quite interesting because the demographics on a number of calls have been similar. But I don't think recruitment is broken, but I think it has the potential to break in the very near future.
I'm going to say something a little bit controversial about Robert's comment. Please, can you confirm the settings in the AI? Is it set to ID specific?
I put that up to you.
So my recommendation there is to find every single career coach out there that's telling you how to AI optimize and block them. Get rid of them from your feed, and your life will be much improved.
I'm seeing whether I've ever told it. Yeah, that's okay. I stay on your
Simon, block me. Because honestly, this is not a thing. It's not a thing at the moment. It might be a thing in the future, although I think there's probably going to be laws in place that prevent it from happening. It's not a thing.
I can't see it being a thing. Most recruitment teams, most recruitment companies are just not that sophisticated.
It's just an easy excuse.
Businesses that run recruitment on a 36,000 line Excel spreadsheet. The entirety of their recruitment, every candidate interaction, every live vacancy, every hiring manager, I just still have cold sweats thinking about it.
And if it does become a thing, it's still better to be human compliant, which is to think about the needs of your reader if and when they read it, because implicitly that would be AI compliant, because all it does is pass information and make on probabilistic models when it is used, but it's not being used in that way in recruitment.
And I think also as a coach, what we work with candidates to try to help them achieve some sort of differentiation in their process. And if you are using a large data model to write your CV, which basically all it's doing is taking stuff that other people have written already, playing with it, putting it into your CV, you've lost any differentiation anyway. And then when you walk into the interview, you won't be losing the language or the tone that your CV is written in, and the recruiter will recognize that. I think AI is... you can't confirm the settings in the AI because I don't think that there is one.
There isn't one. And the same with ATS compliance. What do they mean by compliance? Compliant with what? Yeah. It's a red herring. I mean, honestly, just get the basics right and articulate how you can help solve the problems of that vacancy.
Yeah. And ultimately, you are trying to second guess what the person's the CV's going to land with, what they want to see on that CV. And depending on the structure of how that recruitment team's built, that could be a very, very junior, early in career administrator, or it could be landing directly with the hiring manager. And both of those individuals, one of them might just be looking for the right TLAs and living within a certain area, for example, whatever their criteria is, or the hiring manager is going to maybe dig a little bit deeper.
Put your internal recruitment heads on, how do you react when a candidate gets through to you? You answer your phone, and they ask you a question about the job description. I don't understand this bit, or could you just go into a little bit more detail? And so I want to make sure my application is as valid.
I would say thank you.
Yeah, it's rare. To be fair, people do.
And that's I think it's a really important thing to put back to.
And I've got to say that people who do make phone calls because they've got the agency to do it are typically much more suited candidates because they put that intent in. So it's always a good conversation. I can't remember ever having my time wasted by someone making a call from the back of an advert.
And I think preparation for the call from a candidate perspective is important. Know the purpose. Don't only just think of often people say, "Oh, I rang you." I said, "Why did you ring you?" I wanted them to know that I was sending CV, so I wanted to differentiate myself from. Yeah, you've just differentiated yourself. Has been a real pain in the neck.
Yeah.
If you come and have a conversation and you've got sensible questions to ask that maybe lead into that conversation, I think it has massive value.
And from the get-go, you're demonstrating one of the competencies that signals success in every role type. It doesn't matter what you do for the company, whether you're an engineer or an admin role. You're demonstrating the skill of having decent communication skills.
Yeah.
Great.
I had a call once at Saturday at 7 o'clock when I was walking the dog, and it was pitch black, and it's for a junior accountant position. And I think his dad had told him to call or something. I started off by being a bit pissed off because I thought, this must be a sales call. But as soon as I found out it was a candidate, I was so impressed. And he made it to the final two. He didn't get it, unfortunately. But I think, that was my bias probably playing into it. Like, this is someone who's actually ballsy enough to interrupt my weekend, and good for him.
And stick with the ballsiness. So if you try to contact a recruiter a couple of times and they don't call you back or it doesn't work, don't give up. I think you have to be more tenacious than ever to be successful in front. If you're going to set outside the exclusive process they're trying to put you through, to send the CV in front, they go to
there is also a question we need to ask ourselves as well when we're considering working for any company. It's something I ask myself now whilst I'm job hunting, and it's, am I dodging a bullet as well? If it's that difficult to have a conversation with this business, if they're clearly not that people-focused, people-orientated, I understand the needs. People got bills and mortgages to pay, but sometimes you can see it as a bit of a dodged bullet. It might not feel it at the time, but
is that a point there where we actually go back and look at the differentiation between the different types of people you're likely to engage with? So if it's an internal recruitment function or an HR function, I think you're absolutely within the right to make that judgment. If it's a supplier, yes, there is a degree of judgment, but it's less, I think, obvious.
Absolutely, yeah. It is less obvious. Obviously, I have a bias because of what I do, working in house. But if you genuinely want to work for a people-focused organisation that is interested in putting the right people in, looking after them, is working on retention, they're a people-focused organisation, and they are out there. You should feel it through their recruiting process. If it's a heavily admin focused, bums on seats, and they're just moving data on a spreadsheet, we could have the conversation of where that company genuinely values its people. I have my own thoughts on that, and we'll all experience different things, but it can be a real indicator for how seriously that business takes recruitment attention. And also, it's been said many a time, if you want to know how seriously people take, or organisations take their staff, look at who they employ to do their recruitment for them.
Yeah,
says it all.
That's really important. And I've been through a number of managed a number of PSL restructures, and rid the business of organisations who just had no drive to
no shared values.
No shared value. And you just wonder how they got into PSL in the first place. They got into PSL probably by just being persistent or being a big name.
Possibly, or it was somebody who no longer works in the business. See, this is another thing. Recruitment is a very individualistic thing. There are big recruitment agencies that will have corners of excellence, and they will have corners of recruiters that probably shouldn't have bothered getting out of bed in the morning. Now, again, so it boils down to those sort of individuals, and this is why it again goes back to that sort of networking thing. Good people, keep those relationships going with them, because you never quite know where they're going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And you don't try to buy your car insurance the day after you've crashed your car, because that doesn't work either.
No, I've got to get my daughter's car insurance. If she passes a test, that's going to be an interesting one.
Ooh, I'm taking my niece up to Banbury this afternoon. So if I'm not around next week, that didn't go well. But you're using specific words on LinkedIn Recruiter. I heard someone searching within 25 miles, when most of us now put our location as being likely to work.
That's a really good point. And I think this relates to the AI compliance thing, but it's not related to AI. It is related to recruiter psychology and what we look for. And unfortunately, you are damned if you do, damned if you don't. I think it's helpful to understand how recruiters source through recruiter license and some of the parameters that we use, one of which is location and also keywords as well. But it's catering to the human and what we do rather than software. And that's where technology is a red herring. I think with recruiter license, we did that exercise the other week, didn't we, which shows the limitation, but also the importance of clarity in your LinkedIn profile so that you are found for those things.
I think when I've been heading up recruitment teams, I've tried not to use location, and as long as it is very clear to the candidate where we are, there's a part of me that says, well, actually, the candidate.
That's presumably that's with applications as opposed to sourcing for people, because location is one of the key criteria that we'd use on the basis of if this person has to commute into the office, 25 miles, 30 miles, whatever it is, can expand or decrease the volume of results.
I put up Robert's question because I'll tell a little story to answer that in my experience in a moment. But it's really interesting because does TN recruitment, does it go through ops? Does it go through HR? I've seen it go through finance. I once reported to the HR ops director of a large organization who was made redundant. And I then found myself reporting to the head of facilities. And the argument, I had this discussion with the director, but the argument was, well, she's really good at buying desks, so why wouldn't she be good at putting people sitting at them? And that I left that business fairly soon after the outsourcing was completed.
I feel sorry for facilities managers.
In my experience, Robert, the answers varies. The most successful relationships I've had is when recruitment has reported into an operational HR director, as opposed to
it's
all founder led as well for smaller businesses.
Founder, yeah, and that's a whole. I mean, we should do a session on recruiting into founder led businesses.
For me, it is nearly always been into some form of HR director or senior HR business partner. TA and recruitment in most businesses, and I genuinely say most employers,
and there's a logical
even
reason
if it exists, will be subservient to the HR directors. And in my experience, most HR directors want nothing to do with recruitment whatsoever. It's a module that they do in their CIPD. I would say the more people-focused organisations, again, this is only in my experience, the HR directors have typically come from recruitment. They tend to create the best environment for TA to have the biggest impact, where you'll most likely be seen as a business partner and not just another HR admin process.
Have you ever worked in an environment where reporting lines have been split? So in one company I worked in, so permanent went into HR, contract and contingent recruitment went into finance.
I've had dotted lines to senior. I've had dotted lines to ops, and that's just a personal thing, or to directors within the business that are outside of HR. But that's because of the level that I'm comfortable working at and contributing to. Sometimes it will purely, specifically on Robert's question, it will purely depend on the size and structure of that business, and again, and how much that organisation values recruitment. So they either have a direct line to the top table, or have a top table seat, or it's a 25 grand a year junior admin person that's in a HR team that sits in a box somewhere hidden in the corner of a warehouse.
There's a common reason why it sits within HR, and that's because of I think it's the CIPD employment life cycle. And I'll probably get this wrong, but it's something along the lines of attraction, onboarding, recruitment. It's probably the wrong way around. Development, employment, and alumni. So that's like the sort of general life cycle that's talked about in HR. So obviously recruitment's quite a key part of that. So I think it naturally does tend to sit in HR for that reason.
Yeah, there's that, but I think again, whether it's of early use to people, I actually think it's more akin to a marketing function.
Yeah,
I used to love working for founders because I always felt that if when we're running a proactive recruitment function, there would almost be a mentality that if we save them a recruitment fee, they were going to build an extension, or they get a better car, or they're going to get a holiday. They saw that money coming out of their own pockets. And that gave the ability to reduce cost in recruitment a real emphasis when you're sitting the opposite side of the table from the founder, and you could tell him you saved this amount of money. You could see his mind go, that's a holiday or whatever. And that's how it's working. I love that. I love working in a situation where we had a shared purpose. I was trying to drive costs out, and he was trying to spend it when I did. So that was good. I'm just conscious. It's now 2:20.
Yeah, sorry, I can go on.
No, it's not. No, this has been brilliant. I'm very conscious of the fact that we've covered about 10% of the things I wrote down on my pad here, which is down to my total inability to manage the conversation. But it has been really interesting. I think there are lots of questions that I've missed. I've gone through those, and maybe we can all go and visit the events page.
Yeah, drop me a line, or Simon or John. I'm sure we'll be happy to reply directly.
Thank you to the guys who come along. Obviously, Robert, two Roberts. Nick, thank you for your kind comments earlier. You were obviously drunk when you wrote that LinkedIn post, but it was very kind of you. And everyone who's been on, but some new names, which is great. I hope you got value from it. If there are questions that you want a specific answer to, and I know that we tend to get into the long grass sometimes. If there's something you specifically want to know, and we can give you that, just highlight it on the events page, and we'll try to give you those answers back. So the purpose of this event is to try to is to be customer focused. You're our customers, although
and connect with each other. I mean, Nick's a very knowledgeable people manager. I think you're running your own recruitment business at the moment, Nick, in competition with me, but definitely worth chatting to and networking with. So
that's it. A really, really big thank you to John. Thank you so much for coming on. You've added a completely new layer of discussion, which is fantastic. People are getting bored with our answers, so it's great.
If there's any appetite for it, because this is such a massive subject to talk around, structures and how to navigate this space, I'd always happily chat with people again.
My preference would be for someone to give you the job that you fully deserve, and then hopefully you'll have time when you're back in work to come and join us again.
So what I'd like is
nice.
for John to join us a couple of times and get the job, and everyone assume he got the job because he'd been on Job Hunters Help.
Oh, that would be ideal.
But there are things that we can get into in more detail. So a conversation about how someone in your role evaluates CV. What is the role of an AT? And more importantly, what isn't?
Secondly, CV scan and all that exciting stuff.
You're just trying to push my.
Depends on the role. I'd say straight. It purely depends on the role. It depends on the complexity of it.
Well, that's an hour on a Wednesday afternoon.
Well, it's actually the only answer that's valid in recruitment, isn't it? It depends.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't want to be too woolly on it, but
it does.
And this is why I say if you can, in a position to have a conversation with somebody, do it. You'd be surprised the amount of people that apply for a role and you message them saying, "Yeah, you look really great. Let's have a conversation," and you get completely ignored by them as well. It's at the moment, it's human nature.
Yeah,
we're not great at speaking with each other, and very few of us get out of that blameless.
The help desk going, maybe one next week, which takes us more or less to the end of June, and then just the one in July, one in August, because everyone's off on holiday, and we'll work out what they are. I'm quite keen to get people who have been through the toughest of job hunts and have come out the other end of it and are now happily in a job, to get those to jump on, because the trouble is they're all employed, so they can't. But if they can, that would be great. I think we need to know that however long the tunnel is, there's light at the end of it, and people do get jobs, and it does work. And I think
we've had a few offer, but they're always too busy, which is completely understandable.
Good, isn't it? And Grant Love was going to come on, and he's out of the country, so we'll work something out. But another really big thank you to you, John. Thanks very much for coming on. We will
pleasure.
That offer coming again, because it's been fun. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you for everyone who's been on. It's now 2:25 I've got a call at 2:30, so I'm going to be really selfish and finish the call and disappear off anyway. But thanks very much, everyone, and I hope you got something out of it. And we'll see you next Wednesday or Thursday, probably next Wednesday. See how it works. But thanks very much for coming on this one. Really appreciate it. Cheers.
Thanks, guys.